When finishing university, the thought of applying for a graduate job can be pretty daunting. But here at All Things Money, I'm here to try and make that process seem a little less daunting. So, because of this, I'm back with Shoshanna, founder of The Fairy Job Mother, to discuss top tips to help you successfully secure a graduate job. Hi Shoshanna, welcome back onto the podcast today. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me, Ola.
I know, it's like, what, number 3 or 4?
I don't know.
Very excited to chat with you this afternoon, and especially more so because I'm actually with you in the studio.
I know, so exciting.
Changes things from Zoom, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So I guess, one of my first questions, please introduce yourself to everyone listening that probably hasn't ever heard one of our previous episodes before.
Yes. So my name is Shoshanna. I am founder of Fairy Job Mother, which is essentially a one-stop shop community for young people on all things careers and confidence at work. But then also on the flip side is also a consultancy to help employers develop, retain and engage young people better at work.
I love that. And since you were on the podcast, you're now doing this full time.
Yes.
So I guess it's obviously been a crazy journey because we all know what entrepreneurialism is like. But what inspired you to firstly start the Fairy Job Mother and also what inspired you to actually finally quit and go do this full time?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what inspired me to start Fairy Job Mother was I guess background kind of growing up, like I wasn't particularly academic. I ended up failing my A-levels, failing my exams, and ended up actually going to uni. So I managed to convince the university to let me in, even though I didn't actually have the grades. So when I started, I was very much at like a disadvantage, and it was my goal to effectively get as much like relevant work experience as I could, in order to be competitive and help me out in my future, etc. So obviously when you go to uni, you want to find a job, the first place you go is your uni career services. And I went to my career services and they weren't that great. It was obviously just one kind of office in the middle of the student union, which was supposed to cover the kind of 50, 60 degrees that the university offered, and they weren't that great. So kind of went throughout my time at university of figuring out things. So I managed to kind of land internships every summer. I did a placement year. I worked full-time for a startup, not full-time, but pretty much full-time during my final year. And I was lucky enough to be able to graduate with about 2.5 years of like relevant industry experience. And I kind of got to the end of my time at uni. I thought, do you know what? I think I probably actually know more than like most people do, especially more than the career services at this point.
Fair.
So I'd always had this idea that I wanted to kind of help other students and grads and give back. But at the time I was about to start my graduate job, which was pretty hectic. I was doing lots of travel globally, and then COVID hit. So that
Classic.
all of that ground to a halt, and I had all this extra time. So I just thought, you know what? I want to start helping people, and I just started sharing some like career advice online. I built a little bit of a community, which I was able to monetize relatively soon. And then, I think 2.5, 3 years later now, I'm now doing it full time. And what inspired me to do it full time? Good question. I think I was so fed up of working the whole time. I mean, I still work the whole time, but it's very different. So I would literally, when I was doing it as a side hustle while still working in corporate, I'd literally get up at like 6. I'd be working from like 6 to 9. I'd then do my full-time job. I'd finish, and then I'd be working from like 6 to like 12. So
it's a lot, isn't it?
It was just so much. Felt very burnt out, and I just also felt my time in corporate was kind of done. So I took a plunge, and at the end of this month it will be a year since I left my full-time job, which is crazy.
Woo! And
I know.
how has the journey been so far?
God, well, we're friends outside of this podcast, so you know.
Yeah,
not easy. Like, not easy at all. Definitely the hardest thing I've ever done in my whole entire life, but equally the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my entire life. But it's not easy. It's very glamorized, let's say.
Yeah.
Very glamorized, but equally I've learned so much, and I finally kind of feel like a year in, I'm finding my feet. I'm figuring out what my offerings are. I've moved into the kind of B2B employer space, which has been really valuable, and I've learned so much from that. So I'm making good progress, slowly but surely, but learning lots along the way as well.
No, and I love it. And like I said, you've already touched on the fact that running a business isn't easy, and obviously that's one of the very many options we have post-university,
Yes.
right? So I guess if there's anyone at university at the moment, or maybe has taken a year out of uni and they're now looking to kind of apply for their very first job, what are the different career options post-university?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, obviously, becoming a business owner, I feel like that one isn't actually spoken about at all at university or school that much. So definitely that's an option for anybody if they're interested. So yeah, definitely becoming a business owner. Obviously, the second option is to get a graduate job. So that can be an entry level role, which is where you join an organisation, and as soon as you start the role, you're hired to start a particular role. You're not on a wider program. Or there's getting a role on a graduate scheme, which is where you typically join like a 2 to 3 year leadership development program, where you typically rotate around different parts of the business, and that's around 2 or 3 years long. So there's those options. There's also an internship. So maybe if you were someone that doesn't have any industry experience, or you're not sure what industry you'd like to go into, landing an internship is like a really good way of just testing an industry out and getting a little bit of experience. And then finally, I would also say another option is an apprenticeship. So there's a little bit of a misconception at the moment that apprenticeships are only for 18-year-olds. They're actually for people of all ages. So an apprenticeship is a really good option if you are someone that's maybe, I don't know, looking to completely kind of switch industries, feels like they want a little bit of extra learning. So an apprenticeship is a good option where you can kind of learn and earn at the same time. So you can get a qualification from it, which is free, and then also be working at the same time. So I'd probably say those are the main kind of 3 or 4 options for you.
All which seem very overwhelming, no? I feel like when you're at university, for me, I had plans. I talk about this all the time on the podcast, but I had plans to move abroad. I was meant to move to Australia. And then when I realised that option was taken away from me, I was like, oh my God, what do I do next? And I guess, you breaking those options down is really helpful, because again, firstly, I didn't know about the apprenticeship. So I just assumed that's something you do if you don't want to go to university. So that's a good one that I've learned. And yeah, I think it's good to know that there are different options. As well as working for an employer, you can also go down the route of being a business owner, which has its pros and its cons, but we won't be talking about entrepreneurialism today, because that's a whole other topic. But I guess for those applying for their very first job or grad job, what are some of your top tips?
I think my biggest top tip would just be like when you graduate and when you finish university, there's just this huge pressure around figuring it out and figuring out what you want to do. And I feel like that just causes so much stress and anxiety, and almost creates an overwhelm, because if you are someone that genuinely has no clue, how can you move forward? You can't apply for anything. So I think my first top tip would just be to kind of chill, and just remind yourself that all you need to do is find something that interests you right now. It's not a career you have to stick to for the next 20 years, right? It's 2024. It's not 1980. Like, careers for life aren't really much a thing anymore. So you just need to find something that interests you right now, test it out. And if you like it, great. And if you don't like it, then you can move on and try something different. Regardless, you've gained skills, you've gained experience, and you've also gained an understanding of what you like and what you don't like. So my first thing would just be to just chill. My second tip would, if you are really unsure of like what you actually are interested in, would recommend following this process. So my first thing would be to kind of map out your skills, interests and values. So ask yourself questions like, what am I good at? What do I enjoy? What leaves me feeling fulfilled? A lot of the time, sometimes people struggle with these questions. So if you're struggling with them, try asking like a friend or a family member from their perspective, like what you're good at. Then based on those answers, you can carry out some research based on like roles and industries that align with those kind of skills and interests. And you'll typically get some answers from those. Then recommend you putting together some kind of shortlist and following the kind of listen and learn framework, which is where you obviously try and speak to as many people as possible that are actually doing those jobs, to really determine if it's something that interests you. So LinkedIn is a really good way of reaching out to people. Networking in person as well. Go on to Eventbrite. There's always different industry free networking events that you can attend. So you really want to listen to people actually in those roles to determine if they're worth pursuing. And then finally, if you obviously are still interested in those roles, the next step you want to do is kind of get hands-on. So create some experience which allows you to practice that role or industry to determine if it's something actually worth pursuing. So that can be through obviously things like internships, that can be through volunteering, that can be through even creating your own experience, right? Especially if you're someone that's looking to get into like a creative field. The world is basically your oyster. You don't have to be hired by an employer. You can go and create your own project. So would definitely recommend following that framework for sure if you're not sure exactly what you want to do. And if you are sure what you want to do, I feel like we're going into that a bit more in like the next question, so I won't touch on it too much. But yeah, I think those would be my top 2 tips.
No, I think it's really, really good that you said about creating your own experiences as well. I think that's very often overlooked. I mean, it's weird because during lockdown we had this whole craze of like creative CVs, and I'll be honest, I haven't really seen much of that anymore, but what I have seen is a lot of people that maybe have struggled to go find a job and have now created the opportunity themselves. So they've now become like a VA, or they become their own social media marketer and offering their services that way. And I think that can be another great alternative, again, that doesn't really get spoken about online. But you touched on LinkedIn, a great platform. I mean, again, has its pros and cons, but that's one place that can be a great place to kind of find a job. But where else can you kind of go searching for grad jobs and all these apprenticeships and internships that you spoke about?
So obviously there's specific platforms for students and graduates, for example, the likes of Target Jobs. You can also apply directly via companies' websites. So a lot of the time, I'd say a lot of the time for kind of smaller companies, but even sometimes for larger companies, they don't necessarily do the best job at like promoting their roles. So if there is a specific brand that you really love, or if there's a specific industry you're looking to get into and you can't see their jobs on like the standard job boards, would recommend going to their website directly and seeing if there is anything. Or you can usually like submit your CV or submit your details, and then you'll be notified if there is. LinkedIn, I know we briefly mentioned that, but the jobs feature is quite good as well. So there's quite sophisticated kind of like search terms. Another way of finding jobs is actually, a lot of the time you can sometimes even find out jobs before they've been advertised. On LinkedIn, for example, you can do different like Boolean searches for posts. So I'm sure we've all seen the post of where a hiring manager or someone on their team says, oh, I'm hiring for this role. If you're interested, like email me and shoot me your CV. A lot of the time hiring managers will post this before the job posting like technically goes through HR and goes on their system. So you can be proactively looking for those type of things just using LinkedIn search. And obviously if you notify the hiring manager, email them, you can get in there quicker. Equally, if you can't find the type of job role at the type of company you're interested in, can you be proactive? Can you be looking online for, I don't know, say you want to work at an advertising agency, but you can't find an entry-level role? Well, you can go onto Google and type in advertising agencies near me, and it's going to bring up a list of like 20 or 30. You can obviously then go on their website, get their contact details, familiarise yourself with what they do, and pitch yourself to them, right? And I actually know a bunch of people that have landed jobs that way as well. So I think being proactive is key as well, especially similar to the kind of creating your own experience. I think in 2024, when the job market is so competitive, you can't just wait for opportunities to fall on your lap. You like need to make things happen for yourself as well and be trying everything. So those are some options.
No, thank you so much for sharing that. I think, again, it can be so overwhelming because you've kind of shared so many different ideas, but I think, like you said, opportunities now will no longer land on our lap. The job market's so competitive. I know so many people that are out of jobs because they're kind of looking and they're really struggling to find the right jobs. But back in the day when I was looking for like my very first job, this was before uni, and I used to like scroll on Indeed and apply for jobs on Indeed, and I would never be successful going through these third-party sites. So would you say, I don't know if this is a myth or not, but would you say it's better to apply for a job directly from the employer, or can you rely on third-party sites like Indeed or, you know, Target Jobs, for example?
Well, I think it depends on the platform for sure. So jobs on the likes of Indeed, that Indeed is like the most common jobs platform, right? So for a lot of them it's so easy, and a lot of them have this kind of easy apply or quick apply. So situations where it's that easy to just apply, thousands of people have applied, right? So the chances are very slim. Equally, on platforms like Indeed, a lot of the time when you submit your CV, it's sometimes being screened by potentially someone from Indeed or potentially Indeed system before it even gets to the employer. So I think it obviously depends on the like job platform, but equally applying directly is also a good option, because obviously you're submitting your CV on their website, so they're going to be the first people to pick it up. But I'd say I'm not a huge fan of like sites like Indeed and Read. I feel like that everyone uses them.
Because I never
they
got a
get
job from
thousands
them.
of applications, and
Yeah.
but they're not all bad.
Okay, noted for the
Yes.
future if I ever want to go back into employment. So CVs, right? I feel like they can be pretty daunting, especially if you've never done this, like written a proper CV before. You might have just done like, ad hoc volunteering jobs. Yeah, you might have written a dissertation, but writing a dissertation and a CV is two very different things. So again, like we said, the job market right now is so saturated. So how can you best make your CV stand out?
Absolutely. So I think there's a few things to remember. I think the first one is you want it to be, you want it to be concise and skimmable and easy to read, essentially. Because like we've said, for a lot of jobs at the moment, they're getting hundreds of applications. So recruiters are essentially going to quickly skim through your CV, and they want to have the key information. They want to be able to find the key information that shows that you're a good candidate for that role as quick as possible, essentially.
Yeah.
So you want to make it easy for them. So doing things like bullet pointing your sections as opposed to having super long paragraphs. So definitely easy to skim and easy to read. Relatively short, so I would say no more of a maximum of kind of 2 pages. There's a lot of stuff online around 1 page. I'd say that's more US based, so resumes are very like 1 page.
Okay.
In the UK, it's more maximum 2 pages.
Oh, wow.
However, with that being said, if you're a student who's like never worked before, then I wouldn't really expect your CV to be 2 pages. It shouldn't be 2 pages. Yeah. But obviously that's a lot harder if it's someone that's worked for like 4, 5, 6 years. So maximum 2 pages, I would say. And then equally, you want to focus on results and impact, essentially, over responsibilities. So I like to say employers don't care like what your responsibilities are, right? Because in every single job, everyone has responsibilities. If you've got 2 people applying for a social media manager role and they've both been a social media assistant before, their responsibilities are going to be exactly the same. So if both CVs just list the responsibilities, the CVs are going to be identical. How are they? They're not going to pick you, right? But what you can do is show an employer what you've been able to do with those responsibilities and the results you've been able to achieve. So really focus on that. So after each bullet point, ask yourself, okay, what was the impact of this? What was the result? Was I able to save time? If yes, by how much? Was I able to save money? If yes, by how much? And adding kind of quantifiable things like percentage increases and also time frames really help show an employer the results you've been able to achieve, because ultimately that's what they're looking for, right? And I think when you follow that format, it also makes it easier for you to be considered for opportunities where you don't necessarily have like direct experience, because no matter what job you do, you'll be developing kind of some of the key soft transferable skills like communication, teamwork, and every job needs those, right? So if they can see that you've been able to use those skills and generate results for a business, that's ultimately what they want regardless, because businesses are there to make money and save time and do things like that. So definitely focusing on impact and results as opposed to just listing, I was responsible for, I don't know, checking customers out of the tills, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, I think that is really, really true. I think, again, that's something that a lot of people often overlook, even if it's as simple as, I don't know, being a receptionist, you did X, I don't know. There's so much that you can do and you can really big up. I think a lot of people kind of sometimes undersell themselves because they think the job that they've done wasn't worthy or very valuable. And I think that's probably something you've maybe heard or experienced before.
Yeah, and I feel like sometimes people struggle with the numbers because they're like, well, I've done nothing. And a lot of people think it has to be a number or something they have specifically achieved. But I'm just like, no, it can be something that you've helped contribute to, right? Because if you weren't there and you were pulled out of the equation, that result wouldn't have been able to happen, right?
Yeah.
So you can add that to your CV and say, I played a part in this by doing this, which led to achieving this. So it doesn't necessarily have to be revenue you've generated, but you organise the event, right, which then was able to generate this amount of revenue for the company. So equally, just thinking of it about things like you've been involved with really helps too.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. Now, I guess obviously whilst we're on the topic of CVs, I've heard lots of horror stories. I've heard lots of people using AI, ChatGPT to kind of write their CVs. What are your thoughts on that?
Good question. So I've got to be careful what I say here because I don't want to offend any employer. No, but this is my honest opinion. I think ChatGPT, I'm all for ChatGPT, but I think it should be used as an aid rather than a replacement. Because I actually went to an AI and early careers event at the end of last year. So it was an event put on for employers about how graduates and students are increasingly using AI in the application process, but it also touched upon some of the ways that employers are using AI. So I can actually tell you that now employers, or there are tools that are being developed to actually detect whether you've used AI in your application.
Oh, wow.
So that's something to note about. But with that said, I sometimes think it's pretty obvious anyway. So I'm having conversations with employers where they're getting applications through, and you know when you say something to ChatGPT and it says, "Sure, this is what I'd think." They've basically copied and pasted the whole thing, and they've not like taken that out, so it's so obvious.
Yeah.
So I feel like definitely using it as like a tool rather than a replacement. So ChatGPT is really good to help you structure things. So for example, if you're writing a cover letter and you wanted to be able to, I don't know, showcase an example of when you've had showcase your teamwork skills, an example of when you've had your communication skills, you can ask ChatGPT to help you format that. That's perfectly fine. Or you can ask ChatGPT, oh, I worked on the tills at Tesco. What are some examples of how I could quantify that to add to my CV?
Ooh,
So that's
okay.
actually using ChatGPT to help you rather than getting it to do all of the work for you. Because let's be real, it's so obvious when something's been written by ChatGPT. Like it has no personality. So I think just being creative with it, because employers aren't stupid, they can tell.
Yeah.
And they'll just reject your application straight away. It's so obvious.
Yeah.
So I'm all for using it if you're smart about it and you're not using it to like completely do the work.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting. Yeah, just because I've heard so many stories about people using it for CVs, even essays now. So, yeah.
I mean, some employers have like completely banned. It's actually really interesting because there's like a split. So some employers have like completely banned it, and they now have like notices, basically like before you apply for the grad scheme or whatever, saying like you cannot use AI. But then some employers are like, do you know what? You know, it's here. Let's embrace it, and they've provided guidance of like how AI and ChatGPT can be used to support their application. So I think it's actually quite interesting. It's also telling based on like the employer's response. Is it somewhere you'd want to work anyway?
Yes. Yeah. No, it's interesting. I think the landscape is constantly changing, especially around AI. So that's why I wanted to drop that little question in. Now, I guess to kind of round up today's discussion, I wanted you to hopefully share 3 final top tips for people to kind of hopefully boss their interview should they get successfully through the application stage.
Yes. Okay. My first top tip is use the job description as your guide. So a lot of the time people are like super confused about how they go about preparing for a job interview, but realistically, the skills that are listed under the like what we're looking for, or that's what you're going to be tested on. So a lot of the time you can actually kind of almost predict the questions that you're going to be asked. So use the job description as your guide, use that to prepare. So you want to have examples of those key skills that they're looking for that you can talk about. So that would be my first tip. Use the job description as your guide. Look to be integrating some of those keywords and skills they're looking for in your answers. My next tip would be research. You need to know the company inside and out. You need to know the company more than every other person in the interview, because the worst thing you can do in an interview when they ask you, oh, what do you know about the role? Oh, what do you know about the company? Is go in there and say the same regurgitated piece of information from their company website as the person that interviewed before you and the person that interviewed after you, because that's what most people do. They only look on the company website. So know that company inside and out. Do really in-depth research. Go on the employer's socials and see what they're posting, because a lot of the time that will be different content to what's on their website. They'll post about what it's like working there as a culture. Stalk your interviewers. A lot of the time you'll be given the name of the person that's interviewing you, or if you don't know, ask. Go onto LinkedIn, familiarise yourself with who they are, what their job role is, get to know them. Because again, if you know what they like or their history or whatever, that's going to help you build rapport and relationship with that interviewer, because ultimately people want to hire people they like, right? So yeah, look at podcasts. Have there been any podcasts? YouTube, exec keynotes, company earnings reports. You can get so much insight from just doing that little bit of extra research that like most people won't do. So that would be my second tip. And then my third tip is, I think, the questions, at the end of an interview, they're like, oh, do you have any other questions? I think most people massively underestimate the value of like what asking good questions at the end can do, because if you think about it, it's your last chance to like make a lasting impression. And most people just go in there and they ask the same standard questions like, oh, what's a typical day in your life? Like that they hear hundreds of times. So be really thoughtful about the questions you're asking. So I always recommend asking like 3 categories of questions, having 3 kind of categories prepared. So the first is research based. So these are questions that you can ask that also demonstrate research you've done. For example, during my research, I noticed you recently invested over 2 billion in this sustainability initiative, which is really important to me. Like, would you be able to tell me a bit more about how that works or what the team did? So that's, you're asking a question, but you're showing them that you know that piece of research.
You know the stuff.
Yeah, so research based. The next one I'd say are like role based questions, but be specific. So look at some of the tasks on the job description and pick out something specific to ask. For example, I saw on the job description, in this role, I'm going to be managing email marketing. Would love to know what platform you use. I have experience with MailChimp. Do you use that? So it's a very specific role-based question. And then finally, interviewer-based questions. So these are questions that allow the interviewer to like share their perspective, because who doesn't love talking about themselves, especially
100%.
like we all do. So again, you know, I noticed on LinkedIn you've been at the company for 10 years and you progressed from this role to this role, which is amazing. Can you tell me more about that? Or what's your favourite part about working here? And even just questions like those, especially if it's a question which makes the interviewer stop for a minute and be like, oh, okay, good answer, like good question. I need to think of my answer. Or, oh, I've never heard that before. They're going to remember you because you've taken the extra step. So I think those would be my top 3 tips.
Wow. Guys, I hope you had your pen and notebook there writing all those notes, because you shared a lot of valuable gems just in those 3 tips and throughout the whole episode as well. So guys, I hope you have enjoyed today's episode about how we can hopefully successfully get you to secure your very own job. Now, Shoshanna obviously shared lots of great career content, tips, advice. So for anyone listening that would like to follow you online, where can they go to do so?
Yes, I'm basically on all social channels at The Fairy Job Mother, and also I'm on LinkedIn, and that is Shoshanna Davis.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.